The manager named Susan sneered as she said so. She was using her position as the president's daughter to push me out of my workplace. My former colleagues also succumbed to her pressure and left before me. Unable to find any words to fight back, as I just made a fake smile and was about to leave the workplace. A certain person appeared, instantly causing Susan and the other employees to tremble at the sight of him. That person was. My name is Mark Hudson, 48 years old. I manage a historic inn called Hudson's in Colorado, one of the most historic resorts in the surrounding area. Been in business for 80 years, thanks to our cherished customers who have favored us for a long time, we've continued as an old yet historic inn. The facility needed to undergo a major renovation due to its age. It would take about 6 months. Frankly speaking, a small family-owned inn like Hudson's could not afford to be closed for 6 months for reconstruction. However, by becoming a member of the Great New York Hotel Group, a major player in the industry, we were able to get funds needed for the reconstruction in full. The Great New York Hotel Group has grown rapidly over the past decade or so, and has achieved success by buying up long-established inns and hotels that have reached a standstill, including their employees, and increasing their performance by reopening them after renovations and the addition of new staff. The company's belief is to preserve the good old American inns and hotels. Fortunately, Hudson's was also considered worth protecting. Although Hudson's was not in financial trouble, I was very grateful to be asked to join the group, as I was reluctant to take the plunge in the renovation project. It seems we might be able to slightly raise the employees' salaries, and with new systems and equipment, jobs will be easier. Above all, it will be a good experience for them in terms of making a new start. Many of our regular customers, including the elderly, were pleased with the renovation, as the facilities will be more accessible. 6 months later, Hudson's was reborn as Hudson Resort, changing its name and introducing a new style of inn with spa facilities and steam sauna rooms, something we never had before. With the expansion of the facility, the number of staff more than doubled, and our existing employees had to learn a new manual from scratch and worked hard to prepare for the reopening. Thanks to their efforts, the response was better than expected, receiving high praise from both regular and new customers, but on the other hand, there were some of our colleagues leaving. Officially, I'm the manager of Hudson's, but in reality, I am a hired manager under the Great New York Hotel Group. A person was sent from the headquarters with the title of Operation Manager, and I had to consult with her in everything I do. The operation manager named Susan was 23 years old, and only daughter of the president of the Great New York Hotel Group. She had just graduated from a prestigious university last year, and of course, has no experience in hotel management, but we had to be very careful with her because she is a relative of the president. We needed to recognize her a manager, and everything that happened within the business had to be brought to her attention. If she found out there was something she wasn't informed about, she instantly got in a bad mood to gather her employees and scold them. She was particularly harsh with employees from the Hudson's days. The first to clash with her was my mother, the proprietress. My mother tried to teach the new employees the manners and the etiquette of the innkeepers. However, Susan claimed that the very existence of innkeepers was outdated.
The jacket is too formal. From now on, everyone will wear this shirt and skirt that I've chosen,
she declared, handing out new uniforms to all the employees from the Hudson's. That caused most of them to quit, because the special allowance they received for wearing the jacket has been eliminated. Moreover, working in a jacket was a matter of pride for the inn's employees. It was as important as the helmet for American football players. Still, my mother continued to wear the jacket every day. She eventually broke down and announced her resignation. She was nearing 80 and felt the limits of her physical strength. Since her husband's death, she had become increasingly withdrawn. I was unable to stop her from leaving the inn. After successfully forcing her out, Susan became even stricter with us.
If you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave.
Naturally, such blunt words would turn anyone away.
I'll listen to you, Mark, but I refuse to follow that woman's orders.
It was a sentiment I heard repeatedly from former colleagues. Despite my attempts to discuss that with Susan and ask her to consider the feelings of our colleagues, she refused to listen. In the end, her overbearing attitude did not improve and the employees left one by one. Within a few months, most of my old colleagues were gone, and the place was effectively under Susan's control. However, Tom, who has worked with me since I took over Hudson's from my predecessor, trusted me to stay, even though he disliked Susan.
I'll stick with you until you say it's time to leave.
He is only 28 years old, but he has been working in the hotel industry since he was a teenager. Since he came to Hudson's, he has supported me as my right-hand man. However, Susan regarded him as a rebel and would no longer allow him to perform his special duties. He had been entrusted with all beverage-related purchasing and inventory control, but now he is not even allowed to enter the beverage warehouse without permission. I felt bad for him. He is a talented young man. He could have left me and gone to work at another inn. I continued to serve our guests with heartfelt hospitality, despite being a powerless manager. Susan, however, failed to appreciate that.
It seems like Hudson's guests are all old men and women. We need to capture a younger demographic to survive in this industry.
She claimed, despite lacking management experience. I think it is good business for the innkeepers to be aware of their clientele to some extent, but I consider it against the spirit of hospitality to be selective in the selection of guests. And our role is to make efforts to please both our current and future guests. Then one day, what I feared happened. That was during my absence to attend a gathering of the local tourism association. Susan refused a reservation from Mr. Bush, a longtime patron of Hudson's, without consulting me. Incidentally, the date had been held for him for some time. Every year, he always books the same date to celebrate his wife's birthday, but this year it was on hold due to renovations. Once we reopened, he called eagerly to visit. Susan unilaterally turned it down without consulting me about it. It was not about not consulting me. The biggest issue is that making him feel unwelcome. Apparently, Susan stubbornly refused, saying she already had other bookings. I couldn't stay silent. I had reserved this day for Mr. Bush. I had informed everyone and it was on the schedule. Why accept another booking without consulting? She snorted in response.
A verbal agreement of reservation is just that. I don't care if he's a regular. The younger guests I booked will bring in more profit. They'll order more drinks than an old couple.
I confronted her, unable to tolerate her arrogance. Who do you think you are? Are you so important you can choose customers? A kid who doesn't know the first thing about customer service. Tom tried to intervene, but it was too late. The employees looked at me with fear, realizing I saw Susan had collapsed and trembling in fear. That incident witnessed by many reached the president, and I was removed from my position. After hearing about my decision to leave the workplace in the form of early retirement, Tom seemed to have also decided to take voluntary retirement on the same day.
Mark, I think you were right. She'll get her comeuppance one day.
I could only offer a bitter smile. Regardless of Susan's actions, my inability to stay was my own fault. There might have been a better way, but I lacked the skills and patience. That's all there was to it. As the sole son of the Hudson's family, I grew up watching my father's back, the head of the family. Amidst the emergence of new styles of inns and hotels, our family-run Hudson's proudly maintained its status as a traditional establishment. Our guests chose us for the long-established label and they trusted my father, and they looked out for me too. I grew up without doubting that I would take over Hudson's one day, but it wasn't as if I had always been straight-laced and serious. In my youth, I got into my fair share of trouble and caused inconveniences for those around me. Part of it was feeling stifled by the label of being the heir to a traditional inn. But that was just youthful folly. As I grew up, my rebellious feelings faded, and I started to take life more seriously. I believe this is thanks entirely to the kindness of those around me. I was surrounded by sincere adults. Not just my father, but also the staff working at the inn, and the guests who stayed with us, were all remarkable people who had worked hard to build their businesses or contribute to the country. Inspired not to be outdone, I worked diligently at the inn. Then, 8 years ago, my father suffered a stroke, and I took over the management of the inn. Initially, I intended to just fill in until he recovered, but sadly, he never did. The shock was immense, but there was no time for mourning. I managed to keep the inn open with my mother, the proprietress, but even though I had watched my father's back, I didn't know what was right or left at first. But with the support of my mom and our employees, I gained confidence and strived to provide even better hospitality than before. When I became the manager of Hudson's, I was determined. It was to reform not only this inn, but the entire of tourist town. Visitor numbers to our town were declining year by year. No matter how much Hudson's alone tried, there would be no future if the town itself didn't revitalize. To do so, I believed building a stronger trust relationship with other inns and hotels was essential. Firstly, I organized meetings for staff from both long-established and newly entered accommodations to interact and share information. Abandoning the notion of business rivals, I thought if the entire town acted as a unified community, it would invigorate the whole area. For example, in times of trouble, we adopted a mutual aid approach, readily recommending another accommodation if one faced issues. It applied to staffing needs as well. We shared job applications received by Hudson's with other inns in need, and vice versa. We shifted towards welcoming both guests and staff as a collective town community. Thanks to these efforts, the town began to buzz with life, and started attracting more young people and families than before. The revitalization of Tourist Town even caught the media's attention, leading to frequent interviews. Eventually a documentary film, the publicity helped attract a new generation interested in working in our town. While Hudson's transformation into a resort under the jurisdiction of the Great New York Hotel Group raised concerns. It's probably due to the fear coming from within that the management might be taken over and it would completely change into a different inn. But I trusted the president of the group, because he was an old friend of my father, and had a high regard for him as the manager of the Hudson's. He covered the entire cost of the construction, and left me with the rights to manage the inn because of the trusted relationship he had with my father. However, it seems his daughter didn't get any of that sentiment at all. I should say, in the end, it's my own lack of strength for not being able to convey my feelings. I felt bad for the employees who supported the Hudson's era with me. I heard that most of those who left earlier are working at facilities in our town. Being former employees of the Hudson's apparently made it easy for them to find their next jobs. In fact, I myself have been approached by a well-known inn. It was comforting to know there were people out there who needed my skills. Of course, I planned to work at that inn along with my right-hand man, Tom. Despite how things turned out, I had no regrets in my heart. The original Hudson's as it traditionally known might have disappeared on my watch, but I'm still here. All I need to do is start anew with trusted colleagues. On the last day of work at Hudson Resort, I felt not resentment, but rather refreshed. Susan continued to treat us poorly, but it didn't bother me anymore. Technically, I've already been relieved of my managerial duties, so she is the manager in effect.
Today's your last day. Good work. I heard you got hired at the Colorado Inn, a cheaper and more affordable one. Seems like a perfect fit for incompetents like you.
She said with a laugh, and Tom retorted.
Someone like you could never manage properly. But no matter how it changes, this place will always be the Hudson's Inn to us and our guests. Don't you dare ruin it.
Oh boy. You're a bottom feeder who didn't even go to college, but you've got all the bravado. Besides, I heard you don't even have a family. I heard you were abandoned by your parents and raised in an orphanage.
She said, frowning. Tom just made a bitter face at her words. Likely it reminded him of past hardships. Indeed, he lost his parents early and grew up facing many difficulties. I haven't heard the details, but apparently, there was not a single adult around him willing to lend a hand. That's why he came to this industry where he could live and work to survive on his own. Despite his frustration, he didn't talk back to Susan any further. I understood how he felt and said nothing as well. Then, Susan turned her scorn towards me, laughing.
The useless old man is finally gone.
I wanted to spend at least my last day smiling. Though, as she was arrogant but my manager, I managed to make a fake smile for her. Then, from behind us, I heard a voice say,
"This is terrible."
Both Tom and I turned around in surprise, and to our surprise, there were Mr. Bush standing at the entrance with his wife. Come to think of it, that day was the birthday of Mrs. Bush. Normally, we would have welcomed them at the Hudsons, but we had declined them this time. "Mr. Bush, why are you here?" I couldn't help but ask out loud. Then Susan looked at me and said,
Mr. Bush? I'm sure we declined their visit.
Glancing over and saw that the legs of the employee, who was carrying his luggage, were trembling. But it wasn't just the employee. Every employee who laid eyes on Mr. Bush stood rigid, shaking in place. Unperturbed, he strode into the building. Then, at the sight of him, even Susan turned pale and froze speechless. Well, that might not be too surprising. After all, he used to be the president of a large company. It's natural for anyone to recognize his face and feel overwhelmed by his formidable aura upon meeting him. Even I found him intimidating when we first met. Contrary to his intimidating appearance, talking to him reveals a kind and compassionate man. However, he seemed a bit irate today, furrowing his brow as he looked around the building and said,
"What a terrible state of affairs. This place has lost all its history and charm. And I haven't seen a single familiar face since I arrived. To think that our Hudson's has come to this."
Caught off guard by his sudden outburst, the employees all looked down.
No way, is it the Mr. Bush I know?
Susan could only gulp in silence. Then, he noticed Tom and me, his mood instantly brightening.
"Oh, there you are. I heard a rumor that you were fired. I didn't think it was possible, so I came to check on you, but you're still here. And where is your mother?"
He approached me, and I tried to maintain a serious demeanor as I answered. "Actually, the rumors of my dismissal are true. My mother has retired. She was getting on in years, you see. In fact, today is my last day. It's an honor to see you one last time." Hearing that, he sighed deeply.
"This Hudson's has been around for generations. To think they're pushing you out along with the traditions your father and mother have upheld, I can hardly believe it."
I believe that was also decided by the times. This place is now called Hudson Resort, and she is the manager. She told me that our way of thinking is outdated. Seizing the opportunity, I turned the conversation to Susan. Mr. Bush then directed his gaze towards her. Susan stood still, as if turned to stone. Her usual vigor nowhere to be seen.
"So, you're the president's daughter, right? Quite the eloquent young lady for your age, challenging the traditions of an establishment that's been around for 80 years. Care to explain to this old man what you find so outdated about Hudson's?
Susan was sweating profusely and mouthing words without making a sound, which was incomprehensible. He continued.
If I recall, you were the one who took our reservation call. No matter what I said, you insisted there were no available dates. Even if there was a misunderstanding, the proper thing to do would have been to speak honestly and offer alternatives.
Cornered by him, Susan was utterly deflated, managing only a faint
I'm sorry.
before collapsing on the spot. Then, the office phone began to ring. It rang 2, 3, 4 times, but in the stunned silence, nobody moved to answer it until Tom finally went.
Mark, it's the president of the great New York calling.
I heard Tom calling out to me. Mr. Bush suggested.
Perhaps they're calling to bring you back? Hudson surely needs you. That should be obvious to anyone.
Then, he saw me with a reassuring smile. According to the president, upon hearing the rumors of my dismissal, Mr. Bush had reached out to the headquarters of the great New York hotel group. Susan did not tell the president how she unilaterally turned down Mr. Bush's reservation without permission, but only said,
When I tried to discuss about it, he threatened me.
That was the first time the president learned the truth.
It seems I misunderstood the situation. Moreover, I never gave Susan the authority to run the business. She was supposed to be learning as a newcomer. I didn't expect her to be so arrogant. I am truly sorry.
The president apologized to me. That's fine. I should have also communicated our beliefs more clearly to Susan. She was fresh out of college and wouldn't have known anything. She wasn't the one we should have been fighting against. I reflected on the past. Susan wasn't the type to lack motivation. She had her own ideals, yet I had not discussed those ideals with her. If I had communicated my opinion firmly, she might not have canceled Mr. Bush's reservation without consulting. As I was on the phone with the president, Mr. Bush arrived.
Could you hand me the phone?
Sure. I replied, passing the receiver to him.
Bush speaking. You were about to make a huge mistake. It's not just me who trusts Mr. Hudson's character. If he leaves this in, you'll lose all your regular customers.
He spoke while I listened, feeling a warmth in my heart. Tom came over with a smile.
Getting him on your side, that's so like you, right? I'll follow you wherever you go.
We exchanged smiles. In the end, persuaded by the president, we decided to stay at Hudson Resort. As the manager, most of the decision-making authority regarding the inn was left to me, and Tom was also asked to continue working as my right-hand man. However, my mother and the other employees who used to work with us would not return. Some said they would come back if Susan left, but I wanted her to stay. In fact, I thought she should be here more than anyone. As the president's daughter, she was destined to enter the core of the great New York hotel group. Her growth was absolutely desirable for us under its jurisdiction. To that end, I'm willing to work with her to the best of my ability. Since then, she seemed to have changed her heart a bit, starting to greet customers and serve drinks herself. Her face and demeanor changed rapidly, and she no longer exhibited any condescending attitude like before. Though she and Tom often bickered and had petty fights, I turned a blind eye, considering it a sign of a good relationship. 3 years later, my mother passed away. Many of the guests who had been so kind to her as the proprietress and Hudson's gathered at the funeral, and I was filled with a great sense of gratitude. And with that, I was able to completely let go of Hudson's. Now, we want to fully promote our new style of inn, Hudson Resort. We would rather elevate this entire town we've lived in and will continue to live in, into the world's #1 hospitality town.